Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating account of what the source calls divine guidance and synchronicity. Think of this less like just a story and more like an invitation for all of us to start noticing the subtle ways the universe might be trying to talk to us. So, let's get into it. So let me start by asking you a question, one that comes directly from the source material. Just think about it for a second. Have you ever been somewhere totally normal, going about your day, and suddenly you get this feeling? Something feels different, almost larger than life. That exact feeling is at the heart of the journey we're about to explore together. All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start by meeting the guides, or luminaries as they're called. Then we'll look at the actual signs they apparently sent. After that, we'll get into how you can start to cultivate your own awareness, and we'll wrap it all up with a really powerful affirmation that ties the whole story together. Okay, so before we can really dig into these strange encounters, the first question we have to ask is, who or what is sending these messages? Well, the source calls them the luminaries. So what are they? They're defined here as ascended masters. Now, the idea is that these are spiritual guides who've lived many lifetimes across different cultures, and now they exist outside our normal ideas of time and space, offering guidance to anyone who's, open to receiving it. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it takes this kind of abstract idea and makes it way more concrete. The source actually connects these masters to famous historical figures. For instance, Kuthumi is linked to the philosopher Pythagoras and even Saint Francis of Assisi. And then you have Adamus Saint Germain, who's associated with the mysterious Comte Saint Germain, and get this, the writer Mark Twain. So now that we kind of have an idea of who these masters are, let's look at how they're said to communicate. The source gives us two really specific, really cool examples of these signs and synchronicities. Okay, so for our first encounter, picture this, a busy street, July 12th, 2019. The narrator is just walking along, lost in their own thoughts, when suddenly this radiant figure appears. Just a warm smile, joyous eyes, an immediate feeling that this was not an ordinary encounter. But here's the thing, the message wasn't spoken out loud. It was this powerful feeling, like a telepathic download, of the phrase, "I am looking after you." And what's wild is that this whole divine communication was apparently triggered by hearing a simple, spoken French word, Ali, which somehow anchored the entire experience in that real-world moment. Now, the second sign is a bit more subtle, but, just as meaningful. As the narrator keeps walking, they hear a bird song, a sound that they had already learned to associate with these masters. And this simple, repetitive bird call suddenly became something more. The source calls it a celestial symphony. It wasn't just a random sound from nature anymore. It was seen as a direct message, a reminder that this kind of guidance can pop up in the most familiar, everyday parts of our lives. And that brings us to a really crucial point. According to the source, these signs aren't just random. They're tailored to you. The use of that French phrase, Ali, is a perfect example. It was specific to the narrator's own context, and it was designed to blend in perfectly so it would feel more authentic and resonate on a deeper level. So it's one thing to hear about these incredible experiences, right? But the real question is, how can we start noticing them in our own lives? Well, the source actually offers up a pretty practical exercise for cultivating your own awareness. And the process is surprisingly simple. First, you just set a daily intention to be aware. Just decide you're going to pay attention. Second, you practice noticing the small stuff. The way the wind feels, a smile from a stranger, the sound of laughter. Things you'd normally just ignore. And finally, at the end of the day, you take a minute to reflect on what stood out. That's it. It's a simple practice that's meant to deepen that connection. If there is one single piece of advice to take away from this whole account, it is this. It's repeated 3 times just to make sure it sinks in. The key isn't to go looking for signs or to try and force them. It's simply to be open, just open to the possibility. And this really reinforces that whole idea of being open. The advice is pretty blunt. Don't try to figure it out. Don't overanalyze it. Why? Because you can't. Not with your logical mind anyway. The goal isn't to solve a puzzle. It's just to live the experience. All right, let's move on to our final section and see how this incredible journey concludes. Because years after those first encounters, the narrator gets this powerful, confirming message that really brings everything full circle. So this timeline really shows you the whole arc of the story. It kicks off with that intense street encounter back in 2019. That's followed by the bird song, which reinforced the message. And then it all culminates almost 6 years later with one last validating update. So, years later, on Valentine's Day of 2025, a final message comes through that directly references those first encounters. And it's presented as the ultimate seal of approval, the kind of amazing experience that can happen when you just allow. And that really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The entire narrative, everything we've talked about, it all hangs on this one provocative question. What if the magical, the divine, the synchronous, what if it isn't something you have to go out and find? What if it's already here, all around you, just waiting for you to be open enough to notice?